For the very first time, Israel has struck Doha, Qatar, aiming at the Hamas leadership there. Qatar is one of the two mediating countries, Qatar and Egypt, trying to come up with an end to this war. And now Israel has struck out at the country, but not the country itself, struck out at Hamas leadership, which away from Gaza uses Qatar as a base of operation.
ICE has made their way to Chicago to launch their latest crackdown on illegal aliens. Federal officials launching Operation Midway Blitz this week, which will target criminals across the state of Illinois. This follows a public back and forth between President Trump and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker on how to deal with illegal aliens in the state. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana says governors should be working with the Trump administration.
If Governor Pritzker, instead of trying to come up with tweets to criticize President Trump, he could deploy the National Guard himself in Chicago and stop the 7 or 8 murders every weekend if he cared about it. But he doesn't.
Jury selection resuming in the trial against Ryan Ruth, the man accused of plotting to shoot then-candidate Donald Trump last year. Dana Marie McNichol reporting from Fort Pierce, Florida.
Another round of prospective jurors are going through questioning after more than a dozen were dismissed. So during yesterday's introduction, Ryan Ruth apologized for the first group of jurors, not for the charges against him, but for the inconvenience of having to serve on his case. Now, the first thing the prosecution said to federal judge Eileen Cannon this morning is that Ruth should not be apologizing to prospective jurors, implying that he could be looking for, quote, crocodile tears. We got word from producers in the courtroom that Ruth did not apologize this morning. Judge Cannon dismissed 21 prospective jurors yesterday that noted they had personal hardships.
The House is preparing to take up its annual defense policy bill this week, which will authorize nearly $900 billion for defense spending. More than 1,000 total amendments have been introduced for this year's bill. House Republican Conference Chair Lisa McClain of Michigan says the bill will make historic investments in the U.S. military.
House Republicans are authorizing the Golden Dome, fully funding border security, delivering a 3.8% pay raise for our service members, and deterring China.
Virginia Senator Tim Kaine continues to make headlines for comments about where our rights come from. Robert Thornton has more.
Democrat Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia turned some heads last week when he made these comments during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, where he referenced a quote from Secretary of State Marco Rubio about his beliefs on the origin of rights.
You state, and this is a quote from Secretary Rubio, our rights come from God, our creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. I find that very, very troubling. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes.
Dr. George Barna, senior research fellow at FRC, made these comments on Washington Watch.
I felt so bad for Senator Kaine because here's a guy who is a man of faith. He's trying to be a Christian, but clearly he doesn't understand what biblical Christianity is. He spent years of his life as a missionary. God bless him for doing that. But I don't think he understands the God that he was allegedly serving.
He said if Kaine had a proper understanding, he would know that government reports to God and not the other way around.
The Bible is very clear on that. Clearly, Senator Kaine doesn't believe what the Bible teaches. That's another thing that makes me feel so bad for him. Here's an example of somebody who doesn't understand what absolute moral truth is.
I'm Robert Thornton.
U.S. stocks are holding near their record levels. The S&P 500 added 0.1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 56 points. And the NASDAQ Composite gained 0.2%. More news available online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildmon and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney Empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
we inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
All right, welcome to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution coach. It's nice to be back in the studio. Man, I hadn't been on video for I don't know how long because I've been on the road doing all the shows and some great events, though, man. I'm telling you that there's just, I'm telling you, there is something happening in America. There's a rebuilding, a resurgence, a turning of the tide. Whatever other expression I could come up with, it's just palpable. You can feel it at the churches I was at, from California to Florida, to the conferences that we had, the coach conferences we did in Washington State. Yes, Washington State, literally like right outside of Seattle. California, we did one in Colorado. I mean, these are blue states. I mean, I started to say Colorado's purple because, so good, Republican, solid Republican just a few short years ago, but the left had a game plan. They took over, and now it's definitely blue. But, man, I'm telling you, people are not sitting by and taking it. I mean, there is a level of commitment to make a difference that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And I think a lot of it, I mean, obviously we owe it to the Lord for setting the table for this to even happen. And he's doing it through unlikely characters like Donald Trump, who are basically setting the example of courage and a willingness to challenge the status quo. There's no sacred cows anymore. There's just not. I mean, Republicans even have always been so wimpy about taking on topics that, might be in any way controversial or cause them heartache with the establishment. The vaccine issue is a perfect example of that, where you have the medical industrial complex has just gone off the rails, taking something that was good, an incredible scientific discovery of inoculation and how to prevent the body from being susceptible to a deadly disease, and then corrupting it by having this absurd idea that government is going to collude with pharmaceutical companies, pay them to develop these things, and then require the American people to take these things and inject them into their body, and then tell the company, oh, by the way, if you mess up on the way you develop it or it causes harm, even if it's a small percentage, but it causes harm, you have no liability. We're going to take away your liability, so you have no incentive to do it right. And then, of course, you end up where we are now with 72 to 96 doses on the schedule and pumping this stuff into kids on day one. On day one? You're going to pump a baby that has just been introduced to oxygen and the world, and all of a sudden you're going to pump them full of toxins and things that we have no idea. No study has been done to show what happens when you combine all of these vaccines in such a short period of time. And so to challenge that, though, puts you in the crosshairs of the big farm power and in the crosshairs of the medical industrial complex. And along comes an unlikely character like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to upset the apple cart, to challenge the status quo, to say the things that nobody else was willing to say, but never would have had the platform to make that happen with real change without a Donald Trump coming along, who has, in my opinion, been very wrong on the warp speed thing and the COVID vaccine, and yet empowered RFK to step in and correct things. And the chink in the armor is Donald Trump tweeting out a week or two ago, let's get to the bottom of warp speed and whether or not it was actually a good thing. That's the first time he's been willing to even consider that it could have been a bad idea. It was such a personal thing for him because he felt like he had saved a lot of people in marshaling resources, and it felt like his version of what we'd done in the past with world wars, where we industry and everybody came together and worked together to overcome evil, and he thought that was his moment to do that with COVID and warp speed, and it turned out to be a complete disaster, and it's been hard for him to admit that. I've had friends in meetings with him where if they mentioned that, he lost it. I mean, he was very angry that it was even called into question. Other friends that when they mentioned that, he was shocked. 3 years ago, the first friend of mine that had been in a meeting sitting right next to him asked, or he asked, why are people booing when he mentions warp speed and the COVID shot? And this friend actually said, I'm going to just be honest with you, President. Every one of us have a friend that's either died or has heart problems now or some major health concern. And so when you brag about it, we feel like you're bragging about something that's killed friends or seriously injured friends. And that started getting him, I think, beginning to, not talk about it as much. But then, to actually question it publicly, that's a big deal. That would not be happening without you in this audience. That would not be happening without American Family Radio, without Wall Builders, without people like RFK and others that have been willing to question, willing to say, we just want good science. We want the ability to do the scientific method, which is always challenge, always question, always test, always go back and make sure that you got it right. And I think science is on the comeback. I think truth is on the comeback. And again, God using unlikely characters like RFK and others. But without RFK, this wouldn't be happening in these agencies. One of the first headlines that jumped out at me today, this is shocking to me, honestly. I mean, to be blunt, I feel vindicated. Okay, this is the headline. FDA chief says no solid evidence supporting hepatitis B vaccine at birth. 3 doses of the vaccine are on the CDC's childhood immunization schedule, and nearly every state requires hepatitis B vaccination to attend school. Okay, the reason I say I feel vindicated, this was the one that I would talk about the most 25 years ago when I was in the legislature. And when I was trying to get parental choice in vaccines, I would use Hep B as an example. You only catch Hep B from a blood transfusion or sex, okay? That's the only way that's going to happen. And you had more people getting it from the vaccine, children getting it from the vaccine, than from any other source. And it's just a dumb idea to say, okay, the likelihood of my baby having sex or having a blood transfusion is virtually zero. It's not zero because you could have a disease, you could have a surgery, and the kid's got to get some sort of blood transfusion. I get that. That's a very rare. And a parent, this was my whole argument in the legislature, a parent should be able to make the cost-benefit analysis decision that the likelihood of that happening is so small that I'm not going to inject on day one. They're putting Hep B vaccine into babies on day one, the day of birth. It's absolutely ludicrous. And a parent should be able to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. That is foolishness to put that into my child when there is such a low risk that they would even be exposed to it, let alone get it. So I argued that, and people mocked me. They called me every name in the book. They came after me and defeated me. I lost my next election to the legislature back then because of this issue. It created a medical industrial complex target on my back. And we did finally get the vaccine choice for parents passed, but there's been no change in the schedule because the CDC has been so co-opted, so corrupted by Big Pharma that we give 3 doses of this to kids, including on day one. So for this headline to pop out this morning is I'm just praising the Lord. This is huge. So for the FDA chief to say there's no solid evidence supporting Hep B vaccine at birth, I just say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He said, I personally don't believe that the evidence is solid to say the Hep B shot needs to be given at birth. It's totally different from polio and measles and some of these other shots that are tried and true and have been around for a long time. And so we could debate those as well, particularly, some of the combined vaccines that have, definitely been questioned with regard to autism and some other things. But that's another debate. Right now, it's Hep B is the one that's on the table to be debated. And so, one of these, I'm trying to think of nice ways to refer to some of these puppets of Big Pharma. That one of these guys that resigned from the CDC over all of this. And I predicted that what they're trying to do is to change the birth dose of hepatitis B vaccine so that kids don't get it when they're born. Yeah, it's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to put some common sense and actual science to the test instead of having you people that are getting rich off of babies being harmed, being able to force this stuff on parents all over the country. And for any of you that are saying, well, it's not forced on you, yes, it is. You can't go to a school. You can't go to in public places at times. You can't. I mean, it's insane the requirements that they have for the vaccine schedule. And you can't find a pediatrician half the time. It's very hard to find a pediatrician that will even treat your baby for other things if you don't get every single dose, because their pay, their kickbacks from Big Pharma depend on the percentages of the babies in their practice that have taken all of the jabs that are quote-unquote recommended, read into that required, by the Center for Disease Creation. Yes, I said Center for Disease Creation, not Center for Disease Control. These are the very people that create half the problems. The very same quote-unquote experts telling you what to take are on the back end creating diseases in labs and then creating the vaccine so that they can make a lot of money. Okay, that's the game. That's honestly the game that's been exploited and now being exposed. And so I am so excited to see this headline. Again, this would not be happening if RFK had not only questioned these things, but came with the receipts. I mean, have you ever watched this guy in an interview or a hearing? You are taking your reputation and your career and putting it at risk if you go after RFK in an interview or in a hearing. The guy has the receipts. He off the top of his head, he will run circles around you and show why you're wrong when you're part of that that cabal. And so this is really, 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 really good news that they're willing to do this. I was just reading further in the article as I was talking. We're giving about 11 million doses of Hep B a year, and pretty much all of them are for kids who we know don't need it. That's a senior fellow at Independent Women's Forum, Dr. Monique Yohanan. 11 million doses. I wonder how much Big Pharma gets for each of those doses. I wonder how much money that we're talking about is being funneled to these to these big pharma companies and executives and the bureaucrats that are supposedly the experts that are writing the rules. You know, now we're finding out all of these hundreds of millions of dollars being paid to Fauci and others that created the problem and then supposedly provided the solution, and then they're making money on it. It's sickening and it's corrupt. And the good news is sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the sunlight is being shown on this stuff because RFK is requiring it of the people that are getting appointed and that are getting in these positions of leadership. So thank you to Dr. Marty Macri for, in this particular example, bringing some common sense and some wisdom to this issue. And that's just one of many. Okay, so I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you what's best for your child. I can tell you what we decided for our children was that in a cost-benefit analysis, it doesn't make sense to introduce and inject a foreign substance into a baby for a disease for which they are either virtually not susceptible or likely to be exposed to or any of that, or even if they were, that the result of that would not be, based on the percentage chance they would get, it would not be worth the risk of injecting them with that vaccine. And so for us, for almost all of them, that was our decision. We are not anti-vax. We are pro-parental choice. We are pro-science. And so if we're traveling to a foreign country where a particular disease is rampant and we're going on a mission trip there and there's a vaccine we can take before we go to protect us from that disease, totally makes perfect sense. That's the idea behind what makes these things work. That does not make sense when it comes to hepatitis B, or some of these a lot of these other ones that we've been forcing on kids. So anyway, all right, I only got to one headline. We're already done with the first segment. I'll try to fly through a few more and definitely take your calls today. 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Would love to hear from you. Doesn't have to be about the topic I'm talking about. Can be anything you want to talk about. Comments, questions, insults, whatever you got. 888-589-8840. I'm Rick Green. You're listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green.
You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countrymen. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Representative Delia Ramirez of Illinois is an open borders Democrat who sits on the House of Representatives Border Security and Enforcement Subcommittee. That wouldn't be a big deal in and of itself, except that she recently made an appearance at the Second Pan American Congress, during which she said, in Spanish of course, "I am Guatemalan with much pride before I'm American." My wife helped me with the specific translation. How long can a nation survive when the people elected to serve the nation publicly express loyalty to other nations? There's a reason God prohibited Israel from having foreigners as kings.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
Do you believe in the absolute inerrancy of God's holy word? Do you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to radically change lives and empower us to live like Christ? At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement of people across our nation and across the world who hold fast to the authority of the Bible and the hope of holiness. We are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. Our programs include undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about partnering with us through giving. Learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
Have you ever wanted to take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee? Raise your hand. Yeah, but in order to do that, you have to actually go to the Sea of Galilee. Hello, this is Tim Wildmon, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We are going to Israel and to the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, where we'll have a baptismal service. We're going to the Dead Sea. We're going to Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Nazareth. A lot of the places you've read about in the Bible your whole life, we're going to be seeing on our annual trip of Israel, the Holy Land. If you want more information on our tour, go to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com. We also have information there about the Footsteps of Paul Greece tour that's back-to-back with the Israel tour, so it's also in March of 2026. We look forward to seeing you on one of our tours.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Rick Green.
Welcome back to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. Appreciate you staying with me. All right, next headline, then we'll get to the phones, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. This is actually really good news. So this is going to be a court case out of Michigan, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of background here, a little bit of education on this issue for you to understand why this is such a big deal. But a Michigan court, a judge there, has finally, 4 years later, dismissed the case against 15 accused false electors for Trump. So 4 years of their lives being turned upside down with a threat of 14 years in prison. 14 years in prison. The amount of money it takes to defend a case like that for 4 years, all of that nightmare is finally over for these Republican officials. Now, let me explain just a second what this means. Okay, so the reason these electors even happened in the first place is because you had a disputed election. So just to define what electors are, okay, so this is how the Electoral College works. So the Constitution sets up this thing called the Electoral College, how we choose our president, which is a very unique combination of virtually every idea for how to choose your chief executive. And what happened was at the Constitutional Convention, you had this committee of 11 led by Roger Sherman that basically looked at every possibility. Do we do kind of the parliamentary system of England and others where you let Congress choose the president? Do we do it where it's just, popular vote? Do you do just a national popular vote and whoever gets the most votes wins? Do we let the states choose? This was a government set up by the states, and the states have the final say on constitutional amendments. The states have, supposed to have significant power. They don't use it like they should. But do we let the states, just vote as a state for candidates and choose? So they played around with all of those ideas, and they basically combined them and created the Electoral College. And the way the Electoral College works is you do have a popular vote within the state if the state chooses to do it that way. You have a popular vote in the state, and then the electors from that state, or the electoral votes from that state, go for whoever wins that popular vote. That's how almost all the states do it. There's 2 states right now, Nebraska and Maine, that let each congressional district choose their vote for president, and that one electoral vote goes to whoever they choose. And then the rest of the state goes to wherever it goes. So let me explain how that works. So when you break down the Electoral College, there's 538 votes in the Electoral College. The Electoral College is essentially, it's a number of the congressmen and the senators combined, plus Washington, D.C. has 3 electoral votes. That's why it's 538. So you have 100 senators, you have 435 congressmen, that's 535, and then 3 votes for the Electoral College from Washington, D.C. Now, that required a constitutional amendment to have that. That's the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution. They didn't used to have that, so it was 535 up until the 23rd Amendment, and then they got their 3. Okay, so what that means is if you're a state like Wyoming and you only have 1 congressman, then you only have 3 electoral votes. So you have your 2 U.S. senators, that's 2 electoral votes, and then you have your 1 congressman, so that's 3. So Wyoming gets 3 votes out of the 538. And then a state like Texas has their 2 senators, so you get those 2 votes. And then you have, I think we have 38 congressmen, so we get 40 total for the Electoral College. California gets the most. I think they have 55 congressmen or something like that. And so they get the 55 congressmen plus the 2 senators. So that's how the Electoral College works. And it was a brilliant idea because what it does is it lets every state have a voice. So even a small state has a voice. If you have more population, you have more of a voice in choosing president, but it doesn't allow a president to just win a particular region or just a couple of big states, and you definitely don't want it to be by just popular vote, because then the big cities would elect the president, and they would have more of an incentive to cheat and run up the vote in those big cities. If you cheat in a big city right now, the most you're going to win is that state. So if you cheat in L.A., you can stuff the ballot box and end up winning, running up the number, running up the score, so that you win all of California's electoral votes, but you're not going to be able to cheat in California and win Texas's electoral votes. Hope that makes sense. So it's been a wonderful tool. There's a lot of people that want to get rid of it. They call it national popular vote, and it's a big movement, and you got a lot of states that have adopted it. It doesn't go into effect until enough states adopt it to be a majority of the 538, which we're not that far from it. We need to defeat that, because that's a really bad thing if national popular vote gets adopted. Okay, so back to what happened to these electors. So now, how do you get to the point of having an elector? So electors are chosen at the state conventions of the political parties. So let's just say, for instance, in Michigan's case, I think they do it the same way we do in Texas. Let me give you Texas' case, because I know how it works in Texas. In Texas, you have the Republicans get together, and they have a big convention in the summer every 2 years, and it's the biggest convention in the country. It's bigger than the national convention. Yes, I'm bragging on Texas because everything's bigger in Texas. Anyway, you have this huge convention for the Republicans, and then you have a convention for the Democrats. And at that convention, everybody breaks into their congressional districts. So, for instance, in Texas, at the Republican convention, we would break into 38 different little mini conventions, little meeting, not little, they're usually a few hundred people, meetings of that congressional district. And there was a lot of business that's conducted during that congressional caucus. But one of the things that's conducted is you choose an elector for that district. And that person that's chosen as elector will be the person that then in December, after the election, the presidential election happens, they will gather with all of the other electors from across the state at the state capitol to cast the votes for president. So when we vote, when I go vote in November for the president, I'm actually voting for the elector. I'm actually voting for either the Republican or the Democrat or Green Party or Libertarian or whatever elector to be at the Capitol to then cast the vote for that party's choice of president. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. It's a lot easier in a Constitution class where I can show slides and explain it. But the point is, when you vote, yes, the ballot says Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, but technically you're voting for Donald Trump's representative. You're voting for Kamala Harris's representative, and that representative is chosen at the state political convention in the summer. Okay, so that means that when November arrives, there are two slates of electors that have been chosen by the two major parties. The Democrats have their slate of electors, and the Republicans have their slate of electors. Those people are already chosen at the summer convention. And then when the election takes place in November, whoever wins at the ballot box in that state, that set of electors shows up at the Capitol in December to officially write the president's name and the vice president's name down on ballots that will then go into a really cool box that then gets shipped to Washington, D.C., and that's what the vice president is opening on January 6th. Okay, now you realize why January 6th happened on January 6th, because that's when the electoral votes are actually being counted, and there's an official process for actually declaring the president the winner of the majority of those 538 electoral votes. Okay, so now back up. So we choose our electors at these state conventions, and then we wait to see who wins in November. And if the Republicans win, then those, in our case in Texas, 40 electors go to the state capitol on December, I forget the date, but they go and they do their official voting. If the Democrat wins, then those 40 electors will go to the state capitol and cast their votes. Well, in Michigan, we didn't know for sure who won. And so both sets of electors, in their case 15, didn't know if they were the ones that were supposed to go cast their votes or the other one. And this has happened so many times in history. This was not new to 2020. I mean, it happened a lot in the 1800s, several times. And there were times when 3 sets of electors were turned into Congress from one state, South Carolina. Georgia several times had 2 sets. You had fights going on over who actually won in that state because it was so close. And so Congress had to decide which set of electors to count. Okay, so that's why these Republican electors in Michigan, I mean, these are high-level Republican officials. These aren't just a bunch of yahoos out in their man cave or in the cigar barn getting together and saying, hey, let's pretend we're the electors. That would be fraud, okay? That's where you go after somebody for fraud. This was not that. This was the party officials. To get elected elector, you got to be a good Republican or Democrat volunteer, donor. Somebody's been real involved in the party because you're chosen by the people in your party to be that elector. So these 15 electors were doing their job. They were basically saying, okay, since Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and Georgia and Nevada and the 6, I can't remember the 6th one, I'm blanking. Since they are up for grabs right now, nobody really knows for sure who won because we had all of these fraudulent accusations of stuffed ballot box, extra ballots being given or people not being or turned away or breaking the Constitution because the Secretary of State changed the rules without the legislature involved, which is absolutely unconstitutional. Whatever the reason was, there was a question about whose electors should be counted in D.C. That's the whole reason that there was so much fanfare on January 6th, 2021. All of the people that were there, well, most of the people that were there saying stop the steal, they were there saying, Congress, do your job. You have to choose which set of electors from those 6 challenged states you're going to count. Vice President Pence, you could choose on your own because other vice presidents did that. Thomas Jefferson did it. John Adams did it. Richard Nixon did it. That's plenty of precedent for you to make the decision on your own based on the evidence that you've seen, or you can hand it over to Congress and let them decide. But the rally was basically to say either the vice president needs to do this or the Congress needs to do it, but somebody needs to decide which electors should be counted. That was the whole point. And then you had all these, crazy instigators and Antifa and everybody else that started the riots and broke in and broke glass and crazy, and then it just, went out of control and became a crazy frat party. But the purpose was to ask Congress to make a decision on the electors, not to reverse an election, not to do fraud, none of that. It was literally to say, investigate this, Congress, make a wise decision, make a decision based on the evidence as to who those electors should go to. And there were a lot of outcomes that could have happened. They could have just said, we're not going to count those 6 states. They should have said, Pennsylvania, we're not counting you. Why? Because you cheated. You literally broke the Constitution whenever you had the governor and the Secretary of State change the election law to benefit the Democrats, and you didn't put it before the legislature, which is the only body that can change election law when it comes to the election of president or Congress. So they shouldn't have even counted Pennsylvania. And that's what Mike Pence or Congress as a whole could have said. We're not going to count Pennsylvania, or we're not going to count Michigan, or whatever. And then if we don't count them, it changes the formula. A lot of different things could have happened at that point. Nobody might have got majority, and then it would have gone to Congress to decide the president. I mean, there were a lot of outcomes, and I did a ton of videos and descriptions and went down all those rabbit holes back in December and January of December 2020 and January 2021, because those were real outcomes. Those were things that had happened in the past and could have happened again. Now, unfortunately, because of the breach at the Capitol, Congress was in the middle of beginning to investigate. Ted Cruz was literally making the motion for there to be a committee to investigate this so that they could then come back in a week and make a recommendation as to which electors to count in these disputed states. And because of the breach at the Capitol, they stopped doing that. And then when they came back a few hours later, they just capitulated and approved the electors for Joe Biden instead of actually investigating. Okay, now all of that background, that's why those 15 people in Michigan were legitimately Republican electors, ready to be counted by Congress if Congress decided that in Michigan the cheating in Detroit and the midnight, showing up with ballots and all of that was enough for them to reverse. If the legislature of Michigan had called themselves in, the Supreme Court has ruled 3 separate occasions that the legislature of each state decides how the electors are going to be chosen. Now, the process I just explained to you is how the Texas legislature decided we would choose our electors in Texas. But at any time, that's the language of the Supreme Court, at any time, the state legislature can change how they choose electors, and they could choose the electors. And that's what should have happened in the Republican states where they were disputed. The Michigan legislature was controlled by Republicans. They should have called themselves into session and cast the electoral votes for Donald Trump, and it'd been crystal clear. Same thing for Georgia. Same thing for I'm blanking. Not Nevada. Was Georgia? Not North Carolina. Maybe it was North Carolina. Anyway, I can't remember. But it should have been done in those 6 states. Because it wasn't done, then those 15 Republicans that were the Republican electors for Michigan were viewed as committing fraud. And that's by these crazy prosecutors that were trying to stop people from participating and following the Constitution. Can you imagine being jailed for 14 years because you're trying to follow the Constitution? You're trying to do your job as a party official, as someone that has been elected by the people that you have chosen to assemble and associate with. Your particular political party has chosen you to represent them as the elector for president, and you're just trying to do your job. And you're not saying I unilaterally overturn an election. No, you're saying I've been chosen as a Republican elector. If the Congress decides that the Republican electors are the ones to be counted, then I need to cast my vote, and I need to represent my party. That's what happened here. And then the lawfare and the corruption and the weaponization of the district attorney and the attorney general. It was actually the attorney general in Michigan that did this. They should be prosecuted, actually. The attorney general that brought these charges against these 15 Republican officials should absolutely be charged with, maybe interfering with elections, perhaps treason, for actually trying to prevent people from following the Constitution. But they ought to be charged with something and prosecuted by the DOJ. Okay, you guys have heard me say on the program many times, I think the DOJ and the FBI ought to just go away and you start over. But now that you can finally use the DOJ for something good, for actually enforcing the Constitution instead of persecuting political opponents, they need to hold people accountable like Anthony Fauci and Rachel Walensky for the fraud that they committed on the American people and the world. They need to hold people accountable like this attorney general in Michigan for trying to prevent the Constitution from being followed. So anyway, praise the Lord, another victory. So that's 2 big victories already that we talked about today. One on the FDA saying you shouldn't be shooting a day-old baby full of these toxins. And 2, this Michigan judge dismissing these charges against these appropriately acting Republican officials in Michigan. So lots of good news. And I'm sorry, I know we got some calls. You guys have been waiting a long time. I apologize. I'll get to you right when we come back from the break. 888-589-8840 for anybody else that wants to join. 888-589-8840. We will be taking your calls in just a moment. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. You're listening to At the Core.
Hello, my name is Andy Miller, and I'm the president of Wesley Biblical Seminary based in Ridgeland, Mississippi. We are developing trusted leaders for faithful churches in the can be trained. Also, through doctoral degrees, we'd love at wbs.edu, where we're developing trusted leaders for faithful churches.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential, and we will help you find healing. 866-482-LIFE.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
My debt problem started probably about 2016. I needed my life to change financially. I called Trinity and I ended up joining based on high credit card bills and high interest rate. And my counselor at Trinity has been great, and Trinity has been helping me to get on the right path of paying off these credit card bills, bringing down the interest rate. They have consolidated my bills into one low monthly payment. And now I am finally getting out of credit card debt. So I just want to say thank you, Trinity, for showing me a better and greater path.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Sharon, and soon I will be debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
I'm stuffed. We eat and get full, but then a funny thing happens the next day.
I'm so hungry.
Our bodies need food every day. When God provided manna in the desert, He told the children of Israel, "I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people will go out and gather a day's portion every day." Each person had to gather his own manna, and he couldn't save any overnight except the day before the Sabbath. Collecting the bread was a daily thing. That's a picture of our relationship with the Word of God. Just like our bodies, our souls require daily food. I cannot become the woman God wants me to be if I'm not spending time in His Word each day. Yesterday's nourishment isn't good enough. I need a fresh taste today. When's the last time you filled up on the Word of God? With Seeking Him, I'm Nancy DeMoss Walgamuth.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Rick Green.
Welcome back to The Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. Thanks so much for staying with me. 888-589-8840 is the phone number, 888-589-8840. We will start in Alabama. Roll Tide. Susie, thanks for calling in. What's your comment, question, or insult? Whatever you got, go for it.
Hi. I wanted to call because I wanted to add to your vaccine conversation. I used to work in pediatrics for several years, and I was in charge of sending back the recall vaccines. I was also in charge of training all of the medical assistants that came through our office, and also including doctors and nurse practitioners who were doing residency. And I wanted to just say that none of them ever knew the ingredients in the vaccines. They only knew the schedule, when to give them, and what the names of them were, and sometimes they didn't even know that.
So just blind trust.
Yes. And a lot of times I would tell them, hey, aborted fetus cells are these vaccines, and they would laugh and they would be shocked, and I'd say, yeah, monkey kidney cells are in this one, red blood sheep cells are in this one, and then you have bovine serum, which the serum part of cows, of their blood, is actually just the liquid part, and so that was also in these. So there's a lot of foreign DNA going into these injections, besides just the chemicals and the heavy metals.
Wow.
But a lot of times when they would look so shocked and they'd laugh at me and they think I was crazy, I would say, okay, well, come over here. And I'd pull the boxes out of the refrigerator, and I would pull the inserts out. I'd say, here, see what it says on the box? It says right there, monkey kidney cells. And so I would give them the insert. I'd say, take your laptop, take this insert, come back to me when you've researched every single ingredient listed, and then we'll talk, because I'm not training anyone who's going to laugh about anything, right?
If only we had one of you in every medical office.
I wish. So here's the other thing I wanted to add. So one thing that people are not talking about as well for these newborns is they get the vitamin K shot also the same day, first day, right? So the vitamin K shot, a lot of times they, even people who know about vaccines and how dangerous they can be for certain people, they still opt to go with the vitamin K shot because they are told by all the medical staff there, oh, it's just vitamin K. It's just vitamin K. And even myself, as you know, a young 21-year-old mom, I also opted to give the vitamin K shot to my son. Now, I did not do any other vaccines besides that one, thank God. But for the vitamin K one, I learned later once I got into pediatrics that it's not just a shot. It actually comes with a black box warning label, which includes fatalities as a side effect and possibility. Now, the other thing a lot of people don't know about the vitamin K shot is it also comes with a warning that it can cause jaundice. Now, in the 7 to 8 years that I was doing in pediatrics, I would say about 90% of my patients that were newborns had jaundice. So, and they would come in for their 2-week well check and their 1-month well check. Sometimes they would come in like a 2 or 3 day mark after they got out of the hospital, and also at the 1 week. But 90% of them had jaundice. I can't say how many of that percent had the vitamin K shot, but most of them did. And I worked at some very, very busy pediatric practices in those 7 years. I worked at 2 different ones. One of them saw about 1,000 patients a week. So it's a lot.
How hard is it to get the parents themselves to do a little bit more homework? Because it seems rare that you know, my wife is just a researcher. She loves this stuff, and when I was in the legislature, man, she was literally pushing our 2-year-old around. You know, the Capitol, going into Capitol offices, educating legislators on, you know, Hep B vaccine and some of these others and why we need a choice. And but I realize parents are busy, right? You know, so trying to get them to not just have a blind faith, blind trust in their case, their blind faith and blind trust is in the pediatrician. The pediatrician, it sounds like, has a blind faith, blind trust in the quote unquote experts at CDC and Big Pharma. So we can't count on even the medical professional. We have to take a little bit of responsibility to do some homework ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it falls back on the doctors, I think, have a blind trust and faith because, you know, they went to school, they paid all this money, they got all this debt they're trying to pay off for their education, and rightly so. We get it. It's important. But at the end of the day, who's funding the education? Who is responsible for the books and the material that they're learning? A lot of times, if you follow the money, you'll see it's a lot of big pharma companies that are behind those universities, feeding them, you know, faulty information. So as far as the parents go, so my son now is 23. So when he was born, it was very few and far between that you met other people who did not vaccinate. As the years went on, I think people started to, there was just so much word of mouth of people starting to go, wait a minute, my kid's constantly getting ear infections. My kid's, you know, sick again. My kid has, or someone they know their kid has autism or autistic tendencies. And so I think as things went on and progressed over the years, people definitely are waking up and starting to question things. And the more you question the doctors, the more you find out, okay, well, they don't really know. And that about 15 years ago, they were still getting kickbacks from the insurance companies for keeping their vaccine quota patients, you know, 95 and up percent. Even in my practice, old practice where I worked, after I left that position, they fired my son as a patient because he was unvaccinated because it would have ruined their, you know, quota rate to get their big kickback from the insurance companies. So you have to just question everything. I said, as a parent, I think it's everyone's responsibility just to be objective and always think, you know, let me just research both sides of the coin and make sure I'm not missing something, because obviously you want what's best for your kids. So I think we just have to take a lot of responsibility for sure. But, you know, a lot of times people, you know, they have these same opinions, but also they don't want to say it out loud. So that's another thing. I think this, the fact that, you know, we're making waves with these headlines lately, I'm so excited. I can't, especially, and here's another thing a lot of people don't get, you know, the African-American community is greatly affected by this as well. And a lot of them know it. They just don't talk about it because it was such a thing not to talk about back in the day. But I was part of an activist group down in Atlanta, or I should say up in Atlanta because I'm in Alabama right now. But I was part of this activist group, and we stood out. There was over, 120 of us, I believe, that were outside the Mercedes-Benz Stadium when Oprah came to town with her Pfizer tour. And we handed out all these pamphlets to the mostly black community that was standing in line to educate them on, hey, the stats for the autistic rates are just through the roof now for males who are African American. And it used to be 1 in 100 and something for autism just in the general population. Now, I think the latest number is it's down to 1 in 24, but I could be wrong on that.
I think it's 33. I think it's 1 in 33 because RFK was testifying on this just the other day, and it was, it used to be 1 in 10,000 or something crazy, and then now 1 in 33. And his whole point to the senators was, why haven't y'all been asking questions? I mean, we're watching this data. It didn't happen overnight. It's grown and grown and grown. And I don't know if you heard my monologue earlier in the program, but that was my fight in the legislature 25 years ago, was just trying to get people to question and look at the data and realize, hey, there's some really bad things happening here. And even if it's a small percentage of people that it happens to, well, then at least have informed consent. At least let us get knowledgeable about this so that we can do that cost-benefit analysis and take that risk if we want, and take the other. Everything comes as a risk. It's like Thomas Sowell says, there's not solutions, there's alternatives. You have to decide, what your risk tolerance is on either side of that equation, and it's true with pretty much every health decision. Susie, thank you for calling. Please call on another day. I really enjoyed this, and I love learning about these kind of things.
I'd love to throw one more point out there that I completely forgot to say. So you're not going to find research on this, but I'm just throwing it out there in case someone out there can find it. When I was in charge of recalls, I was fairly new to pediatrics at the time, and it was around 2009, 2010 that we had the swine flu pandemic out there. And all over the news, it was people that were dying all over the world from this swine flu. Everyone was scared to death. They were rushing into the office to get these flu shots and everything. But one day I was told, hey, go over there and pull all the Prevnar out because we got a recall on it. We need to send it back to the state. So in pediatrics, a lot of people don't know this either. If you have state insurance such as Medicaid or any type of low-income state insurance, you're going to get vaccines from a batch that came from the state itself, and it has its own tracking numbers on there, what they call lot numbers, I call tracking numbers. And so they're able to track where these places are low inventory and resend orders without us even having to do anything. We just have to go in and log in the lot numbers for everybody's, shots that they got that day. So if you're a private insurance, you're going to get a different batch of vaccine or, from a different stock because the doctors have to pay for them themselves and keep them in stock. So that's a different section of the refrigerator. Huh. And so anyway, I go over there to pull the Prevnar out because it had been recalled. And I asked 3 different doctors in my practice, why has it been recalled? Do you know? Because I knew I had just given one to a kid the day before. And so I'm trying to figure out, what's going on? Do I need to call this mom? As a mom, I would want to know that something went in my kid that was recalled, And so none of them can tell me why. And so I go into the system where I had to log in to the state site to put the lot numbers in that I was going to send back. And I start reading through the press release, of this recall. And normally it would be about 5 paragraphs, very simple, something happened, whatever, a batch, something was mislabeled or whatever. It could be anything. But in this particular case, it took about 20 pages worth of me scrolling through a lot of complete scientific jargon junk that made no sense. And I read medical journals for fun. I mean, that's literally a hobby. So I'm reading through this stuff, and I'm just like, wait a second, there's nothing really telling about what is wrong with this. So at the very, very bottom, because I refused to give up, I finally get to an answer, and it said it was contaminated with swine flu. And that's when the major light bulb went off to me that, wow, there's a lot of things going on here behind the scenes. It's so corrupt, and people just don't know because they're not on the inside doing what I'm doing as a job, right? Just, going to work every day. So not out there, you're not going to find it, but it definitely happened. So I got out of that profession, and I can't work in it again because it's just the ethics. It's wrong.
Well, and I do think. Well, let me ask you this before we go. I mean, do you see a tide turning at all? I mean, it seems like the COVID vaccine has awakened so many people to not be so blindly trusting and to ask questions. And that may just be my echo chamber.
No, I do think that. I'm not in the medical field any longer, but just in general, I still have a lot of friends who are. And I can tell you there was a lot of people when COVID happened. My sister is actually an ER nurse, and I was in constant contact with her to figure out, hey, is remdesivir, is it really the legit medicine that's working? And all of her ER doctors were against it. They were like, no, we're not recommending anything they're saying. We're doing this, this, and this. And they pretty much just bucked the system, and nobody, it was a small town. And so they didn't really, they were not on the radar. But there's also, the other part of that is there's a lot of cardiologists out there that are not. My doctor told me there's one down in South Alabama that she sends all of her male teen patients who now have heart issues to him because he's the only one trying to keep up with the data and try to prove that there was some correlation between that vaccine. Out of the COVID vaccine, it was, it didn't stay around too long, but there was a section in the original rollout of the insert that it was section 13.1, and it said contraindications, males ages 12, no, I'm misspeaking here. Males ages 15 to 35 are at risk for pericarditis and myocarditis.
So they knew. They knew there had been indications of that in their limited studies that they had done as they rolled this thing out way too fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people now are speaking out about how it was really the remdesivir that caused a lot of the fluid buildup in the lungs and actually, led to the death of these people that were lying in ICU.
Yeah.
So,
yes. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Well, please do call in again. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for being a part of the program today and helping to educate us on some of these things and just encourage us to question and be willing to do our own research. Good stuff. Thanks, Susie.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me have a voice here.
You bet. Absolutely. And Jerry, I lost you there in Texas. I know you've been holding for a while. I do want to comment on that real quick. Yeah, Texas A&M president apparently caught on audio basically, supporting and, the idea of teaching a bunch of this woke ideology. And we've passed legislation in Texas. My friend Brian Harrison has done a great job of uncovering this, a state rep here in Texas, Brian. And we'll see what happens, but this guy ought to be fired. Right now he's trying to just scapegoat the professor that was breaking the law, but he apparently was very dismissive of the student that raised concerns about this and is caught on audio saying, basically it's no big deal. There's not a problem with teaching this, so he needs to go. Texas A&M needs a new president, and I joined the chorus out there of folks that are calling for him to be fired. I did see that Governor Abbott tweeted out that the professor should be fired for breaking the law, but absolutely it needs to go up to the president himself if that was his attitude about it and if he was so dismissive of the student that raised the complaint. So more to watch on that. If you listen to At the Core on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I've got the program, I am not a fan for most students going to college anyway. I think it's a scam and a total waste for most students. Not for everybody. Some of you got to do it, and but sending your kid off to most of these colleges right now when they still teach this woke stuff and put them in an environment like that, unless you've got a kid that's really grounded and really good at defending their faith, don't do it. Don't do it. Be wise about where you send your kiddos. Send them to Patriot Academy. Hey, we got a great one-year program where they can find their purpose, get grounded in leadership, and if they want to get some college credit, they can, but most importantly, get closer to the Lord and figure out what he's got for them. All right, out of time for today, folks. I will see you on Thursday. Walker's with you tomorrow. Thanks for listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family